We welcome you to First Presbyterian Church for our virtual sermon on July the 18th. If you do not have a church home, we'd love to have you to become a part of our family and to worship with us and to serve Christ through it. I'd like to read to you from Mark 6, verses 30 through 34 and 53 through 56. Now the apostles gathered around Jesus, and they reported to him all they had done and taught. Then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." And so they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret, and they anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus, and they ran throughout the whole region and carried the sick to bring the sick on mats so that they could get Jesus to heal them. And wherever he went, from village to towns or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplace. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. In the Gospel according to Mark, the disciples have just returned from their first preaching mission. They had had many experiences of healing and preaching, had preached in several villages, and they are giving Jesus a report. Well, obviously they have had a long journey. They probably are somewhat fatigued. And so as they talk, well, Jesus was surrounded by people who were wanting to be healed. And the disciples and Jesus did not have enough time to even eat. And so Jesus suggested to them that they go apart to a quiet place, and there they could renew their spirits and their own bodies. Well, they got in a boat and they went across the Sea of Galilee. And where they landed, there was a grassy knoll and a hill very close to where they could have walked up the hill and been alone, except that people saw where they went and they ran around the lake and they met them there. Well, Jesus is reminding us of the necessity of rest and work. We have an alternate, and we must abide by that. Now, certainly we are supposed to be working, but we also must have rest. Sometimes it's hard for people to rest and to realize that they have family responsibilities and to give themselves to them. Many youth and children say, "I'm not interested in gifts, I'm interested in a relationship." Well, it's awfully easy for us to get so busy that we even forget about God. Jesus is reminding us that we need to have times that we simply are not doing anything. Jesus often went apart to pray. He left the disciples, and there were occasions when they decided that they better find him because people were looking for him. But that was okay. Jesus knew that he was trying to re-equip himself, that he needed the time of prayer, and quite often he prayed overnight. Well, most of us don't pray quite that long. In fact, it's hard for us to pray many seconds at all. But we are taught that we must have time with God. We must have time with family, and our lives are to be balanced. When I first got out of seminary, and for a number of years, it was hard for me to realize that I needed to have rest times, and I needed not to be busy every single moment, that I should allow time to recuperate and to honor others. Well, it is in the quiet time sometimes that we learn that God is calling us to a particular responsibility. In the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus said, "Come to me and I will give you rest." Now the purpose of rest, as we know, is not to stay there. It's to renew our bodies and then to move on. And in the same passage, he says, I will put my yoke upon you. Well, a yoke is for work. It's not for relaxation. And our bodies are the temples of God. The Holy Spirit dwells within them. And we are taught throughout the scriptures that it's important how we take care of our bodies. It's important what goes into our bodies. And that it's important that we recognize the need for rest. As we well know, we can become so busy and fail to rest, and our ministry is not as effective. It's essential that we observe times of rest, and Jesus knew that the disciples were very fatigued. He was hoping that they would be left alone. That didn't happen, of course, as we will see as we discuss other scriptures. Well, Jesus reminds us that we are to give ourselves to others, but we also are to rest. It's amazing how many people will overpush themselves, or they will put things in their body they should not, and then blame God because they get sick. It wasn't God's fault. His command is, you need to come apart and rest a while. Go to a quiet place. Perhaps just you and your loved ones, or just you sometimes, and go to a quiet place. Now, we well know that we must rest at night in order to be able to function the next day. Or if we have a restless night, we're tired the next day. And so Jesus is reminding us of the necessity of following him. Well, Jesus reminds us that we need to take time for ourselves. And we are reminded throughout the scriptures that we need to take time for God. It's very essential that we set aside a time for God each day, or it's awfully easy to become so involved that we don't even pray or read the Word. But if we have a regular time, we're more apt to observe it. And Jesus reminds us that it is a command that we rest a while. Not just an invitation, but a command because of the need to refresh our bodies and our spirits and to honor him. The psalmist said Jesus saw people, in Matthew and Mark, Jesus saw people, and they were like sheep without a shepherd. In the 23rd Psalm, we read that the shepherd provides pasture for the sheep. You see, sheep are very vulnerable, and they're also very mentally challenged. And they will stand by a piece of ground that's barren. And they will try to nibble whatever's there, and they could stand there and starve to death without the shepherd. Jesus also reminds us that it is his shepherd that calms the sheep. And he is the one who comes to us in a variety of circumstances and offers us assurance and gives us the ability to be calm. Ezekiel says that God is going to send another shepherd, and he will take care of the lost, and he will be the shepherd that will lead the people. Moses said God is going to send another prophet like me, and he will take care of the people. Well, that's what we're supposed to do. You see, Jesus tells us in Matthew 26 that how we care for people is how we show our love to him. That we feed the hungry, we take care of those that are naked, we visit those that have a need, and we seek to minister to them. Well, always in the scriptures, we are seeing an alternate of rest and work, rest and work. And when Jesus told his disciples that they must remain in the upper room and pray for the coming of his Spirit, they needed this to prepare them for their ministry. But then when he ascends a few days later, and they stand gazing into heaven, and an angel says to them, why are you looking into heaven? Go out and do your work. Indeed, you've seen the Christ go away. He's coming again. But go and do your work. Now, sometimes we act like all of the good things in life depends on us. That's why we stay so busy. Well, the prophet Zechariah said, it is not by power or might, but it is by the Spirit of God that things happen. And so we need to learn to rely on God. We need to learn how to be quiet and peaceful. For a number of years, my wife and I had to attend a lot of church meetings because of my positions. And then we visited Grandma and Grandpa's for vacation, and that was the extent of what we had for ourselves. Well, in recent years, we've decided that we need to take time for ourselves, so we don't have to attend those church meetings anymore. Even though they may be important, we simply take time for ourselves and have gone on some delightful trips in the last 5 or 6 years. And that's a way of renewal. It's a way of becoming whole again, because we take time for ourselves. Well, when Jesus and the disciples went across the lake, and there they found that the people were waiting on them. That's not what they had anticipated. Well, they went to this cove and a grassy knoll and a hillside, and that's probably where Jesus fed the multitude later. But they bring people to him from everywhere on mats, and they see him in the marketplace, and they say, you know, if the people can touch the hem of his garment, then they can be made whole. This is indeed faith. However, Jesus, unlike people, when he saw the multitude, he had compassion on them. They were like sheep without a shepherd. He knew they needed guidance, and they needed for someone to help them in a variety of ways. And throughout the world, there are people with a lot of needs. Sometimes we know them, sometimes we don't. But they need our encouragement, and they need to know that they are loved. And it's not our responsibility to determine whether or not they deserve it. Everybody deserves it because they are a child of God. And so we minister unto him. Well, Jesus' ministry was always inclusive. He never excluded anyone. And so the church must not either. We must not exclude anyone, but involve them in our ministries. But to be effective, Jesus keeps reminding us, come apart, rest a while, and you become more effective. We know that if we overpush, that we can destroy our bodies. Well, likewise, we can destroy our spirits if we do not take time to rest with God and to honor him. Often are the things that interfere with our lives, and Jesus often had this in his life. We think it's an interference, when actually it's probably an opportunity from God to give us the chance to minister in his name. So it is in the quiet time sometimes that God says, I have something for you to do. Now, in writing to the church at Laodicea, as mentioned in Revelation, the Spirit said, oh, to you Laodiceans, I have this against you. You have forgotten your former times. You have become cold and indifferent. You're neither hot or cold. I wish you were. But because you're not, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth. And we dare not be indifferent to ministering to the people. We dare not be indifferent in worship of God, although many of us are, and everything interferes with what we wish to do. Well, Jesus is reminding us that we need to be warm and concerned and not hot or cold. We need to be regular in ministering to him. Excuse me. It's hard for us sometimes to recognize, though, that we need to rest a while, that our work is more effective if we spend time in prayer and if we rest a while. There's an ancient story told about John the disciple, and one day he was sitting playing with a bird, stroking it, and simply sitting there. Someone suggested that that was a foolish thing to do, and why was he doing it? And he replied, you know, it's like having a bow and an arrow. When you're not shooting things, the bow needs to be released from its string. It can be taut too long and makes it so it cannot do the purpose for which it was created. Well, this was probably a myth. the same time, it reminds us of the necessity of simply being quiet and listening to God. Indeed, the psalmist said, "Be still and know that I am God," which means that we must be quiet at times and speak with Him. Well, compassion is God calling us to accountability. Compassion is concerned about people and whatever their needs are. We sometimes have to look for them, but quite often they are very readily available to us. Well, will you have the mind of God? You look with compassion on people. Or will you ignore them? Will you hope that someone else will take care of them? And you see, God's always going to have His ministry taken care of by someone. He calls us to our own responsibilities, but if we reject it, then He will find another. He called the people of Israel in the Old Testament to be His people, and their primary focus was to be a servant and a witness to all of the world. And they rejected that responsibility because they did not want to witness to anyone other than Jews. Well, God created the church and gave us the same responsibility, but He will judge us on the basis of how we take care of our brothers and sisters who may be less fortunate than ourselves, or who may have temporary circumstances and simply need encouragement. But always He will say to us, "I am a God of compassion and love. And if you're to be my disciple, you must also be." Let me pray. Father, help us to take seriously your call to us to rest as well as to work, to realize that you've given us the alternation of rest and work so that we might be well balanced and that we might honor you.